It was a Wednesday, 2:15 in the afternoon. I opened the case file, saw the last name Brennan, and sighed. I've seen that name on patrol reports, on commendation letters, on county press releases, on plaques mounted to the walls of the precinct lobby, but never before on criminal charges. I've sat on this bench for over 2 decades. I've seen every kind of defendant walk through those doors, the guilty ones who weep, the innocent ones who shake, the desperate ones who plead, and the dangerous ones who stare you down with hollow eyes that have already accepted what's coming. But nothing in 22 years on this bench prepared me for what walked into my courtroom that Wednesday afternoon. He didn't walk in, he swaggered, designer jeans pressed to perfection, expensive sneakers so clean they looked like he just unboxed them that morning, a gold chain catching the fluorescent courtroom light like it belonged at a gala, not at a criminal hearing, and chewing gum in my courtroom like he was killing time at a bus stop. Like the charges pinned to his name were nothing more than a minor inconvenience between lunch and whatever he had planned for the evening. Tyler Brennan, 21 years old, son of County Sheriff Michael Brennan, the most decorated, most respected law enforcement officer this county had seen in a generation. The boy wasn't even looking at me when he entered. He was scrolling through his phone, watching something that apparently struck him as hilarious, because he actually laughed out loud as he crossed the threshold into a courtroom where 3 serious felony charges were waiting for him like unpaid debts. His attorney, Robert Mitchell, shuffled in behind him, carrying a briefcase so thick with character references and legal precedents that it looked like he'd spent a week building a defense for someone who clearly hadn't spent a single minute preparing himself. Mitchell looked like a man walking toward a fire he already knew he couldn't put out. I watched Tyler Brennan drop into his chair. I watched him keep that phone in his hand for a full 30 seconds after sitting down. And in that moment, I understood everything I needed to understand about this case. This boy had never once been told no in a way that actually stuck. I called his attention and kept my voice level. "Mr. Brennan, please put your phone away." He looked up slowly, deliberately, with the expression of someone who had just been interrupted during the best part of a movie. Annoyed, genuinely annoyed, not nervous, not remorseful, not even mildly aware of the gravity of the room he was sitting in. "Seriously," he said, "can't this wait like 5 minutes? There are moments in a courtroom that shift the entire energy of a room. That was one of them." I heard the gallery react, the subtle intake of breath, the quiet murmur of disbelief. I kept my face completely still. I have learned to do that over the years. When you let your emotions show on the bench, you lose control of the room. And I was not about to lose control of this room. "Mr. Brennan," I said again, slower this time, each word its own sentence. "Put the phone away now." He rolled his eyes, rolled them like a teenager being asked to clean his room, shoved the phone into his pocket, leaned back in his chair with both arms spread wide, and delivered the line that I will never forget. "For as long as I sit on this bench, fine, but this better not take long. I got plans tonight. Plans." The boy had plans tonight. He was staring down charges of aggravated assault, possession with intent to distribute, and resisting arrest. Charges that carried the very real possibility of a decade behind bars. And his primary concern was that the proceedings might cut into his evening schedule. I asked if he understood the charges. He shrugged. Not the shrug of a man overwhelmed, the shrug of a student who forgot to do homework and has decided he doesn't care. Then he leaned forward with a grin that I can only describe as the smile of someone who has never once faced a consequence he couldn't buy or bluff his way out of, and he said something that turned the entire courtroom to stone. "Look, Judge, I think there's been some major mix-up here. My dad's Sheriff Brennan, the guy who basically runs law enforcement in this county. So whatever happened, I'm sure we can work something out." Silence, complete suffocating silence. I watched the people in the gallery exchange glances. I watched Mitchell close his eyes briefly, like a man suppressing a groan. I kept my face perfectly still and let the silence do what silence does best in a courtroom, reveal the truth about a person. And the truth about Tyler Brennan was sitting right there in the open, grinning at me without the slightest awareness that it had just made a catastrophic mistake. I walked him through the incident piece by piece, date by date, detail by detail. November 3rd, Riverside Park, 11:30 p.m., well past the posted closing time. Officer Diana Martinez had responded to reports of loud music and suspected drug activity. She had approached a group of 4 young men, one of whom was Tyler Brennan. In his backpack, she found 4 ounces of marijuana and 2 grams of cocaine, not personal use, not a casual amount. Quantities consistent with distribution. For every question I asked, Tyler had an answer, not a good answer, not a credible answer, but an answer delivered with that same unshakable confidence of a man who believes that confidence alone can substitute for truth. Half the city smokes weed. My friends must have left something in my bag. I can't control what other people do. She was a rookie. She totally overreacted. Then I asked what happened when Officer Martinez first approached the group, and Tyler smiled, not with embarrassment, not with hesitation, but with what I can only describe as pride, and told me exactly what he had said to her. I told her the truth. I said, "Lady, you're making a huge mistake. My dad's your boss's boss. You really want to mess with me over some plant matter?" I looked at him for a long, measured moment. This boy, this 21-year-old boy, had looked a uniformed police officer in the eye, a woman who was alone, doing her job in a park at night, and he had pointed at his father's badge like it was a shield that extended to cover him too. He had tried to use the most respected name in this county's law enforcement as a weapon against the very system the name was built to protect, and he was proud of it. He was sitting in my courtroom telling me about it with a grin on his face, proud of it. I read from the medical reports. Officer Diana Martinez had been treated for a sprained wrist. Officer Marcus Johnson had required stitches for lacerations on his face. I looked up from the page. "Mr. Brennan, how did that happen?" And he leaned back in his chair, spread his hands wide, and said with complete seriousness, "Things got chaotic. I was trying to protect myself from police brutality. 4 officers, multiple independent witnesses, security footage from a nearby parking structure. And according to Tyler Brennan, he was the victim. He had assaulted 2 officers, injured them both, and somehow constructed in his own mind a version of events in which he was the one being wronged. That is a special kind of delusion, the kind that doesn't come from nowhere, the kind that is carefully built brick by brick over years of being protected from reality." Then came the moment that I believe defined the entire case, the moment where the mask came off entirely, and what was underneath was uglier than anything I'd seen in that courtroom in years. I asked him what he had said to the officers during the arrest. He hesitated for the first time, just a flicker of hesitation, brief as a power outage, and then the confidence flooded back. I didn't wait for his answer. I read it directly from Officer Johnson's report, corroborated by 3 other officers and 4 civilian witnesses. "You can't touch me. My dad's the sheriff. You're all going to be directing traffic by tomorrow." Something snapped in him then. Not remorse, not recognition, not the beginning of understanding. Just the collapse of whatever thin restraint had been holding the pressure in. He stood up from his chair. His attorney reached for his arm. He shook him off. And then Tyler Brennan screamed, a full-throated, echoing scream that bounced off every wall in that courtroom and reached every person in the gallery and probably the hallway beyond. "You can't touch me. My dad runs this county. One phone call from him and your precious judgeship disappears. You work for us, not the other way around." The courtroom exploded. People were on their feet, voices colliding. The gallery filled with ordinary people. People who had waited in line, taken time off work, sat quietly through other proceedings because that is what you do in a court of law, erupted in outrage at what they were witnessing. I stood slowly. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "Bailiff," I said, in the quietest voice I had used all afternoon, "arrest Mr. Brennan for contempt of court." What followed was not a dignified surrender. Tyler Brennan did not compose himself. He did not look at his attorney and recalibrate. He fought the handcuffs. He screamed about immunity, actual legal immunity, as if being the sheriff's son came with a diplomatic passport. He called it kidnapping. He called it illegal detention. He swung his fist. He kicked Officer Johnson in the shin, the same officer whose face already carried stitches from their last encounter. He tried to bite Officer Thompson's hand. He knocked over his chair. He threatened every single person in that room, the bailiffs, the clerk, the court reporter, me. with the full wrath of his father's office. And through all of it, I stood at that bench and watched with the cold, steady patience of a man who has seen exactly this kind of performance before and knows precisely how it ends. 2 more bailiffs came in. Tyler was wrestled, still screaming, into his chair, handcuffed, breathing hard. His perfectly styled hair no longer perfect, his gold chain twisted sideways, his designer jeans somehow making him look smaller than he had when he walked in. The gum was gone. The plans for tonight were gone. Everything he had walked in here carrying, the confidence, the arrogance, the absolute unshakable certainty that his last name made him untouchable, was gone. What was left was a 21-year-old boy in handcuffs, and the consequences of every lesson he had never been taught. When the courtroom finally settled into silence, I spoke, clearly, without theater, without satisfaction, because there is nothing satisfying about watching a young life choose destruction when it had every advantage to choose something better. For possession with intent to distribute, I said, I sentence you to 3 years in state prison. The color drained from his face like water leaving a tub. For aggravated assault on a police officer, I add 2 additional years. He started shaking. I watched his hands tremble against the handcuffs. For resisting arrest and assaulting multiple officers, I add 1 additional year. He began to cry. Not performance tears, real ones, the sudden, ugly, gasping kind that come when reality finally crashes through every wall you have built against it. For contempt of court and threatening this court's authority, I add 2 additional years. He looked up at me through the tears with an expression I had not seen on his face once during the entire preceding hour. Genuine desperation. 8 years, he whispered. Please, Judge, I'm only 21. This will ruin my life. I'll do community service. I'll apologize, please. I leaned forward. I looked at him directly, and I said the only thing there was left to say. Mr. Brennan, you spent the last 20 minutes in this courtroom explaining in considerable detail exactly why you are above the law. Now you will spend the next 8 years learning in considerable detail exactly why you are not. As they removed him from the courtroom, still whispering threats that had lost all their edge, still saying his father's name like it was a prayer, I looked toward the back of the room. Sheriff Michael Brennan had been sitting there the entire time. I don't know at what point he had arrived. I don't know how much he had heard, but he was there. This man whose name had been used as a weapon, whose badge had been waved like a get-out-of-jail-free card, whose career and reputation had just been dragged through 30 minutes of his son's worst behavior, sitting in the back row of my courtroom with his face buried in both hands. I spoke to him quietly once the room had settled. Sheriff Brennan, I'm sorry this had to happen in public. He stood, slowly, the way a man stands when the weight of something is almost too much to carry upright. When he spoke, his voice carried every one of those 12 years of service and something far heavier than any of them. Your Honor, I failed as a father. My son never learned that wearing a badge means serving others, not ruling them. I spent so much time building my career that I forgot to build my son's character. Today, you did what I should have done years ago. I had no words adequate to that moment. I nodded. He left. I sat back down at my bench, and for a long moment, I simply sat in the quiet of the emptying courtroom. Then I opened the case file to the notes page, and I wrote the only thing I could think to write. Badge immunity doesn't exist. Character immunity does. He had neither. 5 years later, a letter arrived at my office. The return address was a state correctional facility. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, like someone who had learned to slow down. Tyler Brennan wrote to tell me that Detective Diana Martinez, promoted in the years since that night at Riverside Park, had come to visit him. He wrote about his father, who came every single month without exception, who told him about the officers he had hurt and the community he had embarrassed, and the family name he had dragged through the mud, but who also told him every single time that redemption was possible for anyone willing to work for it. And Tyler wrote, in handwriting that bore no trace of the swagger that had walked into my courtroom, that he had learned the thing he should have known at 21, that his father's badge had never belonged to him, that respect is not inherited, that it is earned slowly through choices made when no one powerful is watching, through service that asks nothing in return, through the quiet daily decision to be someone worthy of the trust that a community places in the people it calls to protect it. He wrote that when he got out, he wanted to work with young people. Kids who thought their parents' names or their neighborhoods or their connections made them immune from consequence. He wanted to be the voice that told them from the other side of that equation exactly what immunity actually costs. I have sentenced hundreds of people in that courtroom. Some of them I still think about. The ones where I wonder if a different decision might have bent the arc of a life in a better direction. The ones where I felt the full, uncomfortable weight of the power that this bench carries. But I think about Tyler Brennan differently than I think about most of them. Not because of who his father was, not because of the spectacle of that afternoon, as extraordinary as it was. I think about him because of who he chose to become, not in the moment when everything was given to him, not when every door was open and every advantage was stacked in his favor and all he had to do was not throw it away, but in the years after he had thrown it all away, in the silence of a prison cell, with nothing left but the slow, unglamorous, unwitnessed work of becoming someone better. That is the hardest kind of change there is. And when I received that letter, I sat with it for a long time before I filed it away, because in 22 years on this bench, I've learned that justice is not always a verdict. Sometimes justice is a letter, sometimes it arrives 5 years late in careful handwriting from a correctional facility, and it says, "I understand now, I finally understand." And that, more than any sentence I have ever handed down, is what this work is for.